Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's an exciting day for a webinar. Um, we have a really good mixed crowd here of people who are on development teams, executives who are overseeing development teams and everywhere in between. And we're going to talk today about why executives and developers speak different languages and how to bridge that gap. And I am Jeffrey Palermo, and we have Tim Barch here, who we're going to be co-presenting, and we're both in the role of chief architects at ClearMeasure, and we're a software architecture company. But before we introduce individually, let's just make sure if this is your first webinar with ClearMeasure, who we are. At ClearMeasure, we empower your software development. We're a software architecture company that makes your software team effective, highly effective, able to move fast and delivering the highest of quality. And this topic here that we're going to tackle, both Tim and I have been through this. I started as a programmer. My first programming job was in 1997. And moved through the ranks, on up the seniority scale as an architect, and then managing people for the first time around 2006, and then various executive positions. And I've been COO at a company. I've been CEO of a different company, and now I'm a chief architect at this company, as well as being one of the founders 10 years ago. And so my experience has taken me all the way through every one of these roles. And so I look forward to sharing my experience and my perspective to help bridge this gap. And I'll let Tim kind of give the same background.
My story is a lot like Jeffrey's, where I came up through the ranks in software. I've always felt like software and technology can do more than just make stuff happen. It should be a driver of the business. And having the opportunity to look back over my career, I've managed teams, I've led teams, I've been hands-on keyboard, to then having large teams in e-commerce where the work that we put out makes us money or allows things to happen and is core to our strategy. I feel like this is a great topic because there's not a lot of alignment that happens in organizations. And it's like two people talking they want the same outcome, but they're talking different languages. And there's this gap that's there. And so I think hopefully today we can shed a little bit of light there. Everybody usually comes to the table with they want the same things, but how do we get there? So I'm excited to have the conversation today. And so back to you, Jeffrey.
All right, thanks, Tim. So our agenda, we've got a lot to pack into this short time, but we're going to define this problem, the developer executive gap, and go through the developer's perspective, the executive's perspective, what people tend to try that doesn't work, and what the actual solution is. And then we'll recommend some next steps for those of you who found some inspiration today and want to start chipping away at this problem in your organization. All right, so the problem is industry-wide, and it's not just, oh, developers and executives speak a different language. It's that over half of software projects fail in our industry. And the term fail, think of it as this: the people that decided to pay and fund a software project, after it's all said and done, they wish they hadn't. That's failure, okay? You can say, oh, as schedule, we baseline to the schedule or anything like that. But the people who said, it's a good idea to invest this much money in the software project, they wish they hadn't done it. That's failure. And for large software projects, over 70% of them fail. And this is stats from Capers Jones's aggregated research. And large projects are over 500,000 lines of code. Because typically it takes 52 lines of code for each function point, and that's the unit of all the research that's out there. And so if you just look at your software and do a line of code count, and it's over 500,000 lines of code, then you are in one of those big and risky code bases. But custom software can make or break a business, and so these are the stakes. And this is why we have to be really good at bridging the gap between developers and executives. Go ahead, Tim.
One of the other challenges that we'll see here is that oftentimes you might say, well, I'm not part of the 70% or the 50% a lot of times people aren't even keeping track. You just have this uneasy feeling like it's just not working, or there's just, and so the Capers-Jones number is a great number to baseline off, but you might not know whether you're in the over 500,000 lines of code or how many thousand lines of code you have, but you might just feel like, well, we tried a project and let's go over here now and we're going to do this project because that's not working. And you just might be constantly moving. That's an indicator or a symptom that maybe there's something else going on, that while you might be not calling it a failure project, you're not getting that you are failing. We're just not calling it that yet. We're moving it around to try to find success. And so I think those are two sides of the same coin. If you're not finding success, you might say you're failing. And so I think it's our job to help bridge that gap. And how is it that you can find more success and avoid the failures?
Okay, so let's go through a software developer's perspective. I've spent many years hands on keyboard in the coder seat, and actually I really enjoyed a project just in the last couple of years where, even being an executive for 15 plus years now, I was able to kind of jump in a developer seat and do some meaningful things, and so from a developer's perspective, we might be saying, hey, look, the compiler is really precise. I have to be exact about this, and language is important. And domain-driven design tells us that we got to have good words for everything. And so we have to be precise. To run a software team, you executives should just learn the jargon. Or a developer might say, hey, if I tell you when I'm going to be done, I'll just be wrong. So stop asking me. Or I might say, hey, I'm doing something. I'm inventing something that's never been done before. If it has, well, let's just go buy a license for it. Or I might say, hey, all the information is in the work tracking system. You have access to it all. Why don't you just go look? Or I might say, hey, the people you hired before me left a big mess. I need to have time to clean it up. Can that new feature wait? Now, whether or not we say those or whether or not we're just thinking those are some of the examples. But I might say that, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that developers are humans, and so even things that I've written in the past, I want to do it better the next time, and so I'm not always elevating my software as the greatest software ever written. And so if I'm asked, I hedge a little bit because I'm nervous that I'm not meeting your needs, or I can do it a better way, or faster. Developers struggle at times with knowing that they're on the right path with the right technology and meeting their needs. Generally, I think people want to do a good job. They come to work every day. Developers are generally pretty smart. They're typically well paid, and they want to do a good job. And so there's just a mismatch, and they want to connect well. It's just really hard, but they've got some uncertainties that maybe is not always easy or at the right time to share with people beyond their own insecurities. And sometimes those insecurities are well-founded, and sometimes they're not. But it creates a perspective from the developer that they're at odds with the executive team or those directing the funding of the projects.
Yeah. All right. So there's also an executive's perspective. And so many times an executive keeps his job by making numbers, by making the company profitable. Certainly with CEOs of companies that have boards of directors, CEOs get fired by the board if the company's not doing well. And we know that significant software projects cost multiple millions of dollars. And so an executive might say or think, hey, time is money. The longer it takes, the less return on investment we get for even commissioning the project. And so at some point, I wish I hadn't done this project. Or an executive might say, the software is only one piece of this strategy and this is the only piece of the strategy that's not on track. You might say, we can't add another developer. It's not in the budget. Of course, the executive wants to ask, when will it be done? I still don't have an answer. Or, hey, that minor bug that you just call minor, it just cost us a lot of money. Or an executive might say, I have no idea what's going on. I haven't received a status report in ages. Or maybe we need to fire the whole team and start over.
I think this is highlighting just a lot of frustration. Depending on how the executive got to the role, sometimes they might not have any technical acumen and have done a great job getting to where they are. And they've got to rely on another team. Sometimes it's somebody like Jeffrey or myself who came up through the ranks and we say, it wouldn't take me that long. Why is it taking you so long? And kind of undermining the capabilities of the team that the software world moves fast. I am an expert in software. However, maybe not the particular use case, the language, and so sometimes we as executives can have a tendency to trivialize someone else's job. And that's off to a good, but it all comes down to me, the fourth bullet point. I'm always like, when's it going to get done? Okay. Don't drown me in your technical jargon. Just tell me when it's going to be done. And that's a really loaded, tough question sometimes for the developers to answer, because have I done a good enough job explaining what it is to be done? Or do I just think that everybody understands the words that magically come out and it paints a very clear picture? And so the when it will be done, I've caught myself so many times just wanting to know that. Don't tell me all the other stuff. Just when's it going to be done? And that can be a loaded question unto itself. And so it creates these two different perspectives are very hard to reconcile. And so I think Jeffrey's got some ideas here that we'll flip to here in the next few slides.
So there are things that are tried that don't work, whether they're tried intentionally or not. Obviously, blaming that doesn't work in any kind of relationship, whether it be marriage or development. And also expecting that the solution is going to be solved because the other person is going to change. That doesn't work. And then what also doesn't work is just thinking that this problem is communication, that just one needs to learn the language of the other, because there are certainly communication consultants, or there's platitudes like getting people together and get on the same page, and also what may be helpful generally but doesn't solve this problem is sending developers to business acumen training, which is out there, or sending executives to technology training, which is out there. That doesn't exactly solve this problem. And so we'll get into what actually does solve the problem, Tim.
The one thing that's not on here, the bullet point that often I see, and I'm guilty of, is let's just try it again. And so the retry. And this time I'll bang my fist on the desk harder, or it's kind of under communication, but I'll say the same things, maybe with a slightly raised tone, or I'll say I'll put a more finite deadline on something. Those things don't tend to work. Those are surface answers, and they also then lead to just a cycle of churn. And so these things don't work. So Jeffrey, what does?
Yeah. So we want to actually solve this problem and close the gap. And so the solution is actually adopting a common model for software at our organization. And it's going to be a little bit different for every organization, because some organizations may be selling the software that we're building. Other organizations may be using the software to automate a lot of the services that we provide for the customer, or some of the software may be only used by employees internal to the company. So we recognize there's those differences, but we actually do need that model. We do need the process that serves all sides. And certainly companies that are made or broken by technology products that have had to get this right. Otherwise, the company would not be around. But there's so many companies that over time, it becomes a good idea to write an internal program. And so one developer is hired at some point, long ago, and then over time, okay, a second developer was hired, and a third developer was hired, and fourth, and so on. But then there was the gap all the way up to the C-level executives, and that gap was never filled. And so a common process is going to be able to be measured and controlled. And essentially, executives have to be able to measure and control every function of the company. That's their job. It's not a bad thing. That's their job. But the process also has to work well for the people who are in the process, so that it creates motivation and engagement for the developers, create not just a good working environment so that there's good retention, but also one that makes the software great. And the people on the hook for building the software are succeeding, are winning, are shipping things fast, and it's getting faster and faster and better, instead of just this drudgery of pressure.
When you talk about closing the gap, I don't think you're suggesting something that's new just for IT. If we step back for a moment and think about it in abstract, we do this with all the other departments. An accountant might have a certain particular software that they're using or a challenge. Well, when you, at the end of the month, when you reconcile, oh, we have journal entries. Okay, a CEO can understand what that is and what impact that has on a financial statement. You've got a P&L sheet, or if you're talking about in your warehouse, fill rates. And we have language that allows the specificity of a job or a function like operations or accounting or marketing to be communicated and understood at other levels. We need the same types of things here. So what we're talking about isn't a new or novel solution to deal with developers. What we're saying is bring the developers and your communication with them alongside all of the other departments that we're currently interacting with. And there's a long history of accounting, and there's a really long history of marketing that creates these kind of communication pathways. We're suggesting the same thing can be done with your development team. And it's relatively new that everybody's had developers on staff or outsourced development partners, but we can create a framework which is not too dissimilar from how it works with accounting, finance, marketing, product development. Insert any department you want. There's a relationship that happens, and how do you communicate and close that gap? It already has been done. Let's just follow the model that has worked with other departments.
All right, so let's look at what that model looks like as adapted for software teams. And it's going to be a business oriented but highly technical process. And the clear measure way for effective software teams is our framework that we use for all of our consulting clients to help their teams be more effective internally and progress along what we call the effectiveness journey. And so the first part of it is aligning on the purpose. That's answering the question of why. Sample questions are, why did this company fund the software team to begin with? And if you ask everybody on the team, does everybody have the same answer? Or do we know that? Why would the company continue funding the team? Why does it continue to be a good return on investment to continue to do software internally and do these projects? Why are we building or running the software? And a resource that we have that's freely available, we'll put those in the links to those in the chat, and of course re-reference them at the end, is our team alignment template. You can go to the Clear Measure website, and that's just a free resource to help with those conversations, to make sure that the development team and the executives at the company are aligned on the purpose for the team. The next, go ahead, Tim.
I wouldn't jump past the alignment. I think it's really easy for executives to say, oh, we're aligned, we're good. If you think you are, go through the exercise. It would be one of two things are going to happen. If you find you're aligned, great. You now have a celebratory moment with your team and you guys are on the same page and you've now just confirmed it, right? It's a rallying point. You might find, however, you're not aligned. And now you've given in a very structured way, the opportunity for yourselves to say, hey, we're not as aligned as I thought I was. And we're going to go fix it. And now you're putting your, so just don't assume we're aligned, or as is often the case, I'm the boss, they should align to me. And so I'm going to, that's also not a recipe for success. So we would say, put on a little bit of humility, go through the process, grab the team, see where you're at from an alignment perspective. Yeah, the results might be surprising. Both, you might find you're really aligned and you feel like but you want the same things, or you're on the same page, or you're not. But you can't fix something until you know it's a problem, and you can't celebrate something unless you know there's something worth celebrating.
Yeah. So that's the why. The next is the what, and we need to align on what the product is, the software product. And so we need to know, do we have an equal knowledge on the market that we serve, or the market that the software directly serves, or the market that we serve as enabled by the software system? What are the needs that we're meeting? What needs are we choosing not to meet in the market? Because obviously we can't do everything. What does our customer need next? What are they waiting for? What features did we build that never got used? In other words, expense, but no revenue, no return on investment. We thought it was a good what, but we were wrong. And so the team alignment template also covers that in the strategy section. So you can use that resource, Tim.
I think there's an interesting point here around, you talk about the product. I don't know that we always called software development or the production of what was produced a product. That's more of a new way of looking at the world. You had business analysts. Everybody's familiar with that. You have project managers, but a product manager, I think that the product manager is almost a mini CEO of what it is that's being built. And that might be you, or that might be someone on your team. It might be VA, but we're trying to say, what are the things that are going to add value to the audience that is consuming this thing, whether it's a public application, website, or if it's an internal app. The product manager is understanding what's being used, what the opportunity is in each of those areas, and they're giving guidance to the thing that's being built. So the customer may not be external, it may be internal. What's going to satisfy the most? And that's where product thinking or product management has become something you're seeing a lot more in the marketplace, because that's a unique skill set. It's taking ownership, and it's a mini CEO, and you might have a couple of those people that play that role, but that is what people are going towards that yield success. We got to figure this out. We got to know what to build.
Yeah. And whether or not there's a person with that named role, somebody has to facilitate to make sure that it actually happens.
Right.
Okay, so on the what, we're going to detour and just give a few examples that are very specific to software, because from a developer's perspective, when we talk about, oh, what are we building? What are we building? Well, immediately we start whiteboarding the structure of the application, and we start talking about the UI that we're going to build, and the data access, and this cloud service, and this microservice, and containers, and all this technical jargon. And we start drawing block diagrams that make perfect sense to developers, but make no sense to executives because they're way too much in the weeds. And so we want to just not caution against jumping into the weeds with tactics, and make sure that we understand the actual question at the highest level before going down. Okay, the next question is how. We want to align on the process for how we are going to deliver the what. Okay, we've decided what we want to put in the hands of our customers and our users. Now the question is, okay, how are we going to go about delivering that? How are we going to go about building and testing and configuring and supporting and operating? And so some of the sample questions, or the piece parts of the how, is how does the market know about or adopt our software? What does that process look like? Is it this tiny $35 a month subscription model, or is it a $300,000 sale upfront just to get in? Or again, do we tell them to use it because they work for our company and they don't have a choice? But either way, let's make sure that we know how the market is going to adopt this software. And how does a customer or direct user request a feature? And when using the feature, how do they report problems to us? And do we even have a process for that works well? Next is, how do we, as the company, how do we prioritize the next features that we're going to build, that we're going to deliver? Or when we think that we're ready with a new feature, how do we test it? How do we make sure so that we don't actually accidentally give our users a new feature that has problems? And then how does the software team design the actual work that we intend to do next? Great, new feature. How does the software team design how we're going to build that new feature? And then once we have the code complete and put it all together, what is the process that in which we deliver new builds? And then going deeper in, how does an individual developer write the code, that inner developer loop? And when the developer thinks that the code is sufficient, what's the process for the developer to deliver bug-free pull requests so that the team can deliver a new build? And we have several resources for that. One is the DevOps architecture poster, which I'll show in just a bit. But before I get to resources, Tim, you think this covers it, or are we missing something?
Well, I think if you go back, I think you've got it. It can be a little bit overwhelming when you think about it. We need a process for this and this. And I think that this happens already. If you step back, you're doing some of this already, no matter what. What we're suggesting is that the developer, when you have a new project, they're going to get excited because they're going to want to open up a new solution. It gives them the ability to shed any technical debt they had before. They can try out a new technology that they wanted to try. It gives them a lot of opportunity, but that kind of jumps down the road too fast. You have to back up and say what it is we're trying to build, but how you do something ultimately becomes very critical to that product success. If you can't adapt it, adjust it, then you're going to run into problems down the road where features take longer and you're not able to move into the marketplace as quickly as you wanted to. So all these things are important from what are we going to go build and how are we going to know that we're solving the right customer request? What are the things we're not going to do? We talk about prioritization. A lot of times you're going to be constrained somewhere, and it's going to come down to what are we going to choose not to build? We're going to make someone not happy by not doing something. Knowing how you're going to prioritize that and process is it as critical to the success of a software project as is what code base you put it on, and so it's just thinking through all of these things. It's critical to understand and at least abstract away or recognize that these decisions are being made, whether we have a defined process around them or not. They're happening within your organization, whether a developer's making it, a product manager, the CEO often, or some executive. They're going through this and making these decisions. And so call it out and make sure you understand where you have good processes and understanding and are making good decisions, or where you're just maybe winging it and not doing the right steps in order to ensure success.
Yeah. Most teams have some type of tool where they track status, at least track status of the low level things that developers are working on, maybe not status of higher level things. However, what we find is that even in using a system to track status, executives still don't have the question of when's it going to be done and where is this thing, but developers think that we have so much stuff, but it's at too low of a level. If you raise it up just a little bit to be in the middle and serve both constituencies and bridge that gap, you'll find that you'll be adding new columns to whatever work tracking system you do. Jira is popular, Azure Boards, Azure DevOps is popular, even GitHub Issues is popular, and there's plenty of others. The market is saturated with really great work tracking systems these days, but it's up to you to call out the statuses. And so in the middle, we have, development's happening. We're actually working on an individual item and we're slinging code. But oftentimes an executive is just gonna ask the question, I told him that I needed new feature X by this date. It's almost that date, so I'm sure they're almost done. But that new feature may be sitting right here in user experience design if we have it specified. And what that means is the executive gave the feature to the development team, assumes the development team is working on it. But guess what? The development team, there's no active work happening if we say, okay, we finally understood it, but we still have open questions about how a user is going to use it. What should it look like? What should the screen progression look like if it has screens? Or is it just a batch job? And where are we going to get this data? How is a user going to use this? And we might have some open questions about technical design. If it's there in that status and the executive doesn't know, well, then the executive is just going to assume or be asking all the time. Whereas if we have a board where everything has a place, well, then now anyone who glances at it actually gets a glimpse of the truth. And people outside the development team look at it and say, oh, there's no code even been started on this item. It's stuck back here. We have a date coming up. Let's fix that. Or they can see that, oh yeah, it's in user experience validation. That means it's probably in one of the test environments. And okay, it is code complete, and we're just making sure that it doesn't have any bugs, that type of thing. So make sure your work tracking system actually has all the necessary statuses.
Yeah, what this does is it allows you to talk about certain things at certain points in time. If I take an example of building a house, you don't start talking about paint and where the outlets are located before you dug a hole in the ground for your foundation. And so what you have to do is we know there's a process around building a house or something like that. You got to bring that same clarity to this process. So you're not having discussions early on about things that don't yet matter, that you're aligned in expectations management. And ultimately, if you look at the entire thing as development. Well, just code. Well, you're sort of asking for recipe, because the guys who are probably your more expensive resources who are writing code are probably writing the wrong thing, or you're going to have a lot of rework cycles. They're going to build something that wasn't, you're going to find out later had user experience problems, and now you're going back to do this step. And so it's ultimately going to take longer, which is just going to be frustrating to you. So if you think about what is the process now, Jeffrey, I know we're not going to go down this road, but we're not necessarily suggesting a waterfall methodology necessarily. What we're saying is that there are certain statuses and things that have to happen for software to come together. It's not just writing code. There's lots of things that have to happen to make a successful project. Identify what those are, and those, call them phase gates, call them checkpoints, call them milestones, but just make sure that those are happening. And it's not just, Jeffrey, just go code. We'll run the business. You go write the code. Because a developer would say, I can do that, but the best developers I know, and there's a lot of them, they get uncomfortable writing code for things that they know is going to miss the mark. And so they want to do a good job. And so have these steps laid out so you understand that you've got these various gates you got to cross. It's not all just code.
Yep, absolutely. Now, for the stuff that is code, which there's a lot of it, it's also important for everybody in the organization on up to the executives involved and the executives who are funding the whole team to understand the technical flow for how new builds of the software are actually delivered into the organization. And this goes into the structure of the DevOps environment, which is so core to the inter-developer loop and the team delivery cycle that we're constantly spinning every day, every week. And so I'm not going to go into detail. We have other webinars. We've gone into really great detail on this, but this is another resource available to you that will be a link in the chat. And this one, as well as some of the other diagrams that we showed. By the way, these are all in my latest book, .NET DevOps for Azure. That's available on Amazon. But anybody who want to request one, you can request one. We can send you an electronic copy of that book because so much of this is in the first half of every chapter before going into details about the specific tooling that we use on the Microsoft platform. So before we kind of go into the next alignment, another process is integrating an individual developer's code flow through testing and inspection and integrating back to the team so that we have all of the levels of technical quality control that are necessary. And some teams like to call it their pull request process, which is a part of it, but there is specific processes that make individual developers run on 93 octane or run at full speed and just turbocharge them. And if you don't have these processes around how an individual developer writes code, well, the team is going to move slower. And so this is a flow. We're not going to go deep in. This is a flow, and we've done other webinars on it, that is at the center and at the most detailed level of how a developer writes and submits code changes. And so it's important to get that right. And if you're an executive, make sure that your team has technical processes all the way down to this level, because if any of them are missing and you're frustrated with the pace that the team is delivering, you're just going to continue to be frustrated because they don't have enough structural process to enable them to move at the pace they need to.
This is an area where, as an executive, you don't have to know all the intricate details. All you have to know is that there should be a process for these capabilities that allows your team can take certain liberties and go implement them. And if they give you pushback as an executive, this is an area where I would push a little bit, and not to assert dominance or anything, but to say you need to have a process for this. I mean, when a bug gets fixed or identified, how are you going to fix it and know that it gets fixed well and it's not creating other problems and you're playing whack-a-mole? Ultimately, these last two slides are critical to the delivery mechanism to making your software work for you. And the best companies out there that deploy all the time have processes like these. And what it allows them to do is deliver features faster. And so we don't need to wait and do a deploy once a month. Boy, I got a feature that's done and it's gone through testing. It can go out there and start delivering value now. if I made a mistake and we decide we need to roll something back or adjust a feature, we can do that just as fast. So these things, this is where you want to make sure your engineering team has something that they could explain to you on a whiteboard, but you don't have to push and say, well, should you be using git commit push, or should you be using subversion? You shouldn't care at that level, but just know they should have a process, and you should feel empowered as an executive to push on it. And the developers, you should be prepared to explain to your management team why they want this. And it's not just you building up a system that's, kind of obtuse. This is going to unlock value for the executive team. Executive team, you got to be patient with the developers and let them build this stuff if this is what they're asking for. You want it. They're trying to serve you by a process like this.
Yeah, for sure. All right, the next one is when. So we need to align on the schedule. We need to know when the market is needing this. When is the market event that we have to be ready for? Something's happening in the market and we have to hit that. Or by when does a customer need something in order to secure their business or to make sure that they buy from us? Also, we need to know when the cutoff date is, after which the new feature we're building, it's not even worth it anymore. If we miss a certain date, then we need to deprioritize that feature and move on to the next one because it no longer has the same return on investment. Or to when can this feature be delayed? How far back can we push it in the schedule so that we can prioritize something else? Do we have any flexibility, Tim?
Well, I sure hope so. I mean, you got to have the ability to know what's being built, when it's going to add the maximum amount of value, and adjust on the fly. And so, developers have to know and and align with executives to know what are the real drivers behind a schedule and what's going to fit in there to make maximum impact. So it's absolutely critical to a success of a project.
All right, and after when comes the where. We need to align on location, and this is multifaceted. So we need to ask the questions: where is our market, both physically but also digitally? Because we hang out in physical locations and we hang out in digital locations. Our customers do too. Where is the team going to work? What's the office environment? And have we intentionally curated that office environment? Even if the office environment is working from home, do we know that our developers actually have a productive physical environment at home? Or do they need some help with that? Where will the team produce the work? And digital systems are part of the work environment. Again, everybody who does work needs a very productive environment in which to do the work. So digital systems are part of that environment. Are they good digital systems? Do they work well, or are those digital systems insufficient? And this is where executives, if a developer is asking to move to some other system for work tracking, or asking for some type of testing tool or some type of automation tool, you may just think, oh, great, another thing for my budget. But these are part of the software engineering work environment, just as important as anything that you might think is important for a physical office, like having a break room or having clean restrooms. Digital systems are part of a developer's work environment. We also have to ask, where will the software operate? And in this cloud world, some people make assumptions, oh, everything's web, but it's not. Software runs on smartphones, it runs on desktop computers, it has components that run in the cloud, or for specific reasons, it might run in a private client data center, or be a software system that has a component running in each of those places. And so we have to be clear on where the software is going to operate so that we can talk about the constraints and the trade-offs. And one of the resources that you can get from ClearMeasure on that to help you with it is our architect retainer, where a chief architect like Tim and myself comes alongside and provides some fractional software leadership to help with these questions and options and guidance to help your team get there, Tim.
Yeah, this is not uncommon in other departments. In your warehouse, you've got 5S methodologies. You've got a break room, and we just have to get comfortable with the idea that these questions that Jeffrey's put on the screen here and walked us through are normal for the software world and software development teams, and we have to be thinking about them. Just like we put, if someone's standing all day, then they get a pad to stand on, and ergonomics, and where are we going to put the broom to sweep the, the warehouse floor? Like, there are all systems for that. The same thing has to happen here. We have to be comfortable with creating an environment where we can succeed and where we can have, systems and teams operate effectively.
All right, the final question for alignment is who? Aligning on the people. And so the questions are who is the user? Who's going to be using the software? Now, besides the user of the software, who is the customer? Maybe the same as the user in some cases, but in a lot of cases, isn't the person paying the bills is not the same as the person using the software. So let's be clear on that. Also, who will support the software? When a user has a problem, who's giving them really good support, really good customer service? Also, who is going to build the software? These are roles of the team. This is the structure of the development team itself. And do we have enough? Do we have the right skills? Do we have too much of one skill, not enough of another? Who will design the software? It's not just a group of code and we're purely self-organizing and everybody does everything else. I mean, it's natural to specialize somewhat. The same person who's amazing at CSS and beautification is probably not going to be the same person who's amazing at data performance. Okay. Who's going to envision the software for the market? We talked previously about product management and whether it's a single dedicated person or whether a few people share that, but we need to know who is going to be casting the vision and going to be the expert in the market to come up with the right ideas for the software, for how to change the software, how to morph it. And we have tools that's a part of our team alignment template that can be a resource for this. And there's a common software team choice that mid-sized companies can do. And this is, no company has an unlimited budget. Okay, so we can take the outcome that we need, and if it's capital outlay and we want to get a return on investment for some R&D investment, we can design a team specific to the outcome, specific to the project, and that's a valid way to go. Or we can say, you know what, we're really operational cash flow driven. We have monthly budgets, and we're going to keep some number of development teams on staff, and we're going to tailor the outcome of that team to whatever it is. Tailor the outcome to the available team. Those are both viable choices. Let's just be clear and talk out loud about which choice we've made, because we have to fit within the constraints of whatever the choice is. And there is a hint, okay? Because even if you say, look, this is the number of developers we can have, we're not going to have any more developers, fixing the process empowers your available existing team to deliver so much more than you're used to if you don't already have this process that we've gone through in place, Tim.
We talk a lot about alignment, and it comes back to, and this is an ongoing conversation. If if Jeffrey and I are working on a project, it may be implied that Jeffrey's going to do this part and I'm going to do a certain part because of our skills and we know each other. But we should probably go through some exercise to make it known. And then if a third person joins the team, that person may not know the benefits, or if the customer changes. So I think at regular intervals, you have to often step back and don't assume that we're aligned. Let's just go through a small process to make sure that we're aligned and that we're taking full advantage of the team and the constraints, as Jeffrey called out. There are real business constraints. Sometimes we get a tax write-off if we do this in R&D, and so you can fund it one way. Sometimes you're operationally cash flow strapped. It is absolutely appropriate to adjust the way in which your team is operating depending on your constraints. But if you're one way to supercharge or take full advantage of whatever it is you have in your situation is just communicating about this process. Who's doing what? What am I relying on somebody else for? It makes a lot of problems go away, or it avoids a lot of simple problems by making it clear who's what, who's doing what, where are the expectations lying.
Yeah. All right. And so those are the alignment. And the final point before we close out with next steps And by the way, if you've been holding on to a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A window. Once we're finished, we'll stick around and answer some questions. But the final is report. All right. If you're on the team, make sure your team is reporting to whichever executive oversees you. If you're the executive and you're frustrated that your team's not reporting, well, make it clear what you want them to report. Okay. But there's no function or department in business that where a report does not make sense. And it accomplishes a couple of things. It accomplishes the confidence to continue funding the team. Executives can see, good numbers on the scorecard, good progress, that the business needs are being met. There's good return on investment. Guess what? We're going to continue funding the team. Also, it accomplishes retention for the developers. It's beyond just employee satisfaction. Developers tend to be intrinsically motivated, and it is fun to win at the game of software. It is fun to be able to crank out changes quickly and just be really good at building and changing software. And that makes it worthwhile for a developer to stay at a company. And executives know with any department or team, if the team members are quitting, that's way more expensive than any other investment. So it always makes sense to retain your good people. And when you think about what the report needs to include, we have a sample scorecard as a part of our clear measure way for effective software teams. And you can certainly use that template. We'll put a link to it in the chat, but a report always includes a scorecard with the measures that are relevant for your team. And also two other things, the team kind of reporting up, hey, here's some challenges. We need some help. Or, hey, these are the risks. I'm starting to whiff a risk, a bad thing that might happen. Here's a fork in the road. We need a decision because we need to figure out how to handle that risk. So these are some of the pieces, but there needs to be a report. No report is not a good idea, Tim.
That's exactly right. I think on both sides, as an executive, it is okay to ask your team for a report. They're gonna probably, if they're not doing it, they may not love the idea. They may, if so, great. But as a developer, if someone above an executive is asking for a report, you should owe it to them. They are funding and putting a lot of capital towards a project. And so what I'd also say is don't sit down and we've got templates and guidance, and it's just guidance. If there's a metric that is more beneficial to track for your company, then do that. And sometimes you don't have to create gobs of systems, and it shouldn't take don't hesitate to get started. If you have nothing and next week you're reporting 2 metrics, great. Now make it 3 or 4. And the goal isn't to accrue metrics. The goal is to have a good understanding of what's happening within the software business or the business that the software is supporting. And so don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Get started. And you don't want it to take 2 hours, 3 hours to prepare this report. Start off with, hey, Jeffrey, did we have any downtime last week? Was the website offline? Nope. Okay, I'm going to put 100% here. Do we have a system that can report that for us? No, not yet. Okay, we should get that so we can just grab a number from somewhere. But you said there was no downtime, so let's just start tracking downtime because that's really important to us. Don't try to say, well, we can't report downtime until we get this system, and then, well, that system needs this, and now but you can report something, and you can make those numbers more trustworthy as you go. But generally, you can put a finger in the air and start somewhere. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I know there's a lot of information. Your brain's probably hurting to get into this time, but some sample next steps, just hands down, use our resources. They're free. We want them to be beneficial, and we want to know how they're working for you. So use them. They're all on our website, including recordings of past webinars. Also, what's free is a free one-on-one strategy session with a chief architect. Okay, any of our, maybe Tim, maybe me, but any of our chief architects, a free strategy session just to talk about the situation and get a finer point on what you should do internally. And you know what? There's a lot of things that you can do independently, and that's great. And we'll kind of push you in the right direction. And then where it makes sense for us to help with something, That's what we do. We love seeing internal software teams succeed. There's other companies that want to take your project and get it outsourced, or there's other recruiting companies that want to kind of place, contractors internally. You've decided that you're going to be good at software in-house. We want that for you. And that's how we think. And so, I mean, there's so many common initial engagements that tend to make sense for a lot of companies. Assessing the software organization, inspecting the software itself, inspecting the software process, the architecture of the software, doing some planning around platform engineering with the DevOps automation and cloud technologies, or just some advisement or mentoring for the software leader of your team. We do a lot of that as well. So send an email if any of those can be useful. And we'll close out Tim and then see if there's any questions.
Okay.
All right. So one comment that we have: developers and CEOs who are not familiar with code versioning. It's just a comment, and that is true. And that's just not only code versioning. There's plenty of other patterns where the developers on the team and the CEO might both not really know the right way to go in that case. And that's where it helps just to get some outside advisement, because Clear Measure, we have several patterns around all kinds of details, including code versioning and release candidate packaging. And if we just talk about it, then there'll be some clarity and they can make some changes and it'll be fixed pretty quick. So that's not the code versioning isn't the only one where, nobody at the company might not know the best way to go, but just get a little bit of advice. And a lot of these issues are really simple to solve individually.
Sometimes you see, in conversations I've had, that the way you develop software for, airline systems or big, medical systems is different than maybe what you need. So you want to be careful. I think we have a great process and we've laid out all the different ways, but the way that someone develops software for that company may not work for your company. And so, that's where we can come in, and we want you guys to be successful. And so we can make recommendations that are appropriate for where you're at in development. We can help sequence those to say, there might be 10 things you might not even know where to start. Hey, this one right here is going to probably give you an 80, kind of a big lift and get you on the way. And so sometimes it's just talking that through or pointing in the right direction or confirming maybe a thought you already had. You need to develop your own processes, and they may look like other companies, but you don't want to copy necessarily exactly what another company has. You got to know why you're doing something, and we can help with that. And so we do a lot of that work where we say, this is going to be a big payoff for you. This one's important, but you can't do this one until you get this one solid. And so that's some of that. We'd love to talk. We'd love to be able to understand your pain points and maybe some of your successes. I love hearing where people are doing great.
Definitely. All right. Well, one thing we enjoy is finishing a little bit early and giving you some time back. So thank you so much for the attention. I know your time is valuable, and send us an email, info@clear-measure.com, if we can be helpful. And thanks so much for your time. Have a great day. And we'll stay on just to answer the question. If you don't have any questions, go ahead and move on. But just a question just came in, Devin. Does Clear Measure offer coaching to developers on how to grow and maybe work through some of the challenges or areas where they aren't as strong as in other areas? Absolutely. Yes. That is a very important part of a software development team being successful. And that's our focus. So we always tend to have a number of clients where that is part of the engagement, part of the focus. Developers need to grow, and or there's just a sticky thing to get through. So the answer is yes, and we'd be happy to follow up with you and talk through that. If that's helpful, just let us know. All right, and I think we covered everything. Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.